Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. My name's Sophie. I'm an intern at See Ahead, and we have partnered with the lovely folks at MakeTimeFlow and Venture Cafe, as well as Tom from New View Media, without whom none of this would be possible, as you see him back there with the tech. So we've partnered to bring you this DeepCurrents series. This is the third event that we've done. We had another star interview with Allison Rogers, who's a member of the See Ahead community. And we also did a learning session last month in November that was really, really interesting. So tonight we're going to be having another star interview series with Eagle and Narath. They're going to sit down and talk about entrepreneur wellness, well-being, productivity, especially in this space of startups and startup work culture. And as a company that works with startups, this is really important to us. We want the people that we're working with who are trying to create big, really meaningful change to also be prioritizing themselves and their own well-being to do the best possible work. So this is really exciting. I think it'll be a cool conversation. Just before I hand it over, going to give a little background on See Ahead for anyone who's not familiar with us. We are an organization that supports venture innovation for the oceans, and we're based here out of Cambridge. And we work with startups in the blue tech sphere, specifically through programs. So we have an incubator program, Blue Swell, that we run with the New England Aquarium. It's currently in its third cohort, and Eagle was actually a member of the first cohort. We also have an accelerator program down in Mississippi with the University of Southern Mississippi. And then we also invest in startups. So we have a group called the Blue Angels that are all accredited angel investors that kind of are interested in investing in blue tech. And we are also currently raising a fund. So lots of exciting things going on. And if you have any questions, we welcome you to connect with us after. Feel free to ask me anything. But that's all I have, and I'm going to turn it over now.
Thanks so much, Sophie. Well, thanks, Eagle, so much for joining us today. And thank you everyone here. I'm really delighted, actually, that it's smaller, because we're hoping that there'll be a bunch of conversation that'll happen afterwards. We're going to just get a quick sense of who here is part of a startup. Great. Who's leading the startup? All right. Is anybody part of like blue tech or ocean tech community? Okay, that'll be mostly online. I think we're slowly building this community area. We're going to focus on a few different areas sort of like related to well-being. Some of the challenges, I think, in particular. Does anybody struggle with a sense of productivity?
Yes.
Anybody struggling with balance, life balance issues? And then other people sometimes talk about wanting to be more effective or more impactful. Does Anybody have some issue that is a burning question that they didn't come up yet? Okay, perfect, thanks. So we're going to start with a number of questions for Eagle. We're going to sort of have a brief discussion related to that, and then we're going to sort of open it up for questions as we go through. The hope is not that we have to have all the answers, and I'm certainly not expecting Eagle to have all the answers for it, but to share some of the successes that he's had and then some of the challenges. Eagle, first off, we just want to get to know you a little bit. So if you could tell us a little about yourself and then sort of how you became passionate about the work you're doing now.
Yeah, so my name is Eagle. Currently live in Boston. I founded a company called VinciVR, Vinci Virtual Reality. And what we do is we make VR training for both the military, but more specifically for See Ahead, for offshore wind. So training wind technicians, training mariners, people working at port. I started out because I was really into video games, high school and college. And I discovered VR after winning a hackathon and got a VR headset. I blew all of my money on it from winning the hackathon. My friends thought I was an idiot. They were like, why are you spending all your money on video games? And, they were going out and spend their money on, booze and what college kids do, So, but no, I got a VR headset and I set it up in my dorm room, and I played like a few games at the time, and it was the real early days of VR. And from that, I was like, this could be awesome. I want to make my own video games in virtual reality. So I went to business school I didn't know anything about programming. So I had to like learn on my own in my dorm. And eventually I made my first game. One of my a grad student at the college I went to, Babson College, he was part-time working at the Army Research Lab. He saw one of my apps and he's like, can you do the same thing before like military equipment? And that's how it got started. So ever since, kept working on it. Eventually in 2020, we started moving into offshore wind because it was starting to become the next big industry in Massachusetts. And I wanted to stay in the state, and we kind of kept going from there.
Great. Sounds like a fascinating journey. Lots of work through your passion in your dorm room. Tell us a little bit about VinciVR now and like where you guys are. Your website, by the way, they've got some really cool videos that sort of like walk you through it, even without a VR headset. But tell us where you are now and sort of what's your team like.
Yeah, so I'll focus most of it on our offshore wind work. Obviously, I said there's the other half of our company working on different defense projects, aircraft maintenance, have some interesting stories on that if you're ever curious. But in offshore wind, we're looking at how do we make VR for what we call the entire workforce pipeline. So if you think about what does it take to get someone, interested in offshore wind, which most people don't really know what it is. Actually, do most people in this room even know what I'm talking about, like offshore wind energy? It's the big, tall fans. Yeah, so
I think Ted Kennedy made it famous by complaining terribly about it. Is that right?
yeah, Cape Wind, yes. It's so offshore wind started taking off really around 2020. And what we do is we have VR modules that are actually able to certify workers. So earlier this summer, we were the first VR company in the world to actually certify people to work on offshore wind turbines, like technicians in the world. And also because the industry is so new in Massachusetts, the union workers that we certified for our VR tool were also just the first union, like the first workers in the Northeast certified to work on the US's first offshore wind farm ever. So we have everything from that to just general education for kids and students, right? If you want people to join the industry, you have to get them early, around middle school to high school. And right now in the US, frankly, there's not really much education about renewable energy. I remember talking to this middle schooler who thought that like the wind turbines were like fans to like cool down the planet. That was, like to fight global warming, they were just like fans that you spin really fast and you cool down the planet. I might actually
creative geo.
Hey man, that kid might be a genius. You know, like we don't know it, but he might actually be onto something. But for now, no, that's not how it works. Just to be clear, that's not how wind turbines actually work.
Cool. You've talked a lot about like the technology that sort of got you into it, but now you're talking a lot about sort of workflow development. Do you have a team around you, or is it just you still hacking away?
No, it's we have a professional team of engineers. They won't let me touch the code anymore, thankfully, because I don't even know. I can't recognize the code base anymore at this point. But I do know enough that I can like at least hire people. So we do, most of our team are developers. It's something that I'm working on now. We hired our first salesperson about 2 months ago. So right now we're starting to look at how do we build out the business development team, which is a whole nother, like the challenge went from how do I make an app not crash in like Visual Studio and like working in Unity and Unreal Engine. And now the challenge is how do I make sure that I can get an entire team of people together to deliver something on time. And that's a whole different issue. Yeah.
You just do it inside Meta though, right? With those little floating torsos.
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
No, we don't have any team meetings on other horizons. Yeah.
Cool. So I think this happens a lot in the startup community where people go from being sort of the entrepreneur driving the idea and then becoming a team leader. So I think for the questions that I'm going to ask you, I was hoping that you would give us a sense of like your own personal response and then how you think about it as an entrepreneurial leader. So you've been accomplishing a lot over this time, and you've been one of these stars within the CA community. As you think about productivity for yourself and then for your team, can you tell us a little bit about sort of how you approach it?
For myself? It's frankly something I need to work on. Like about a year ago, we were actually about to die at Vinci. Like we had about a month worth of runway left, and it was like down to like, can we make the last payroll? And we do. What happens after that? If we like run out of money, if the bank account is zero. And that was one of the biggest mistakes I made. Was at the time, we had a lot of projects in offshore wind, but we weren't really collecting revenue on it because a lot of our apps were still early and new, and we had essentially all of our eggs in like Air Force contracts, and one of the big ones fell through, like a continuation contract, which basically meant that we had to scramble to like essentially come up with a new business model. So back then, the productivity issues were different. So because back then it was like, how do we essentially reach out? And I was basically just like emailing people all day, every day to get more customers. But since in that year since, now the issue is instead of having just one customer, now we're like struggling to actually fulfill enough customers. So I feel like productivity wise, I think it's something that I need to figure out, because we went from doing one ding 100% really well to now how do we do 10 dings and maybe we could do 50% like good. I don't know what the right answer is to that. That might just be more of a expand a team, or maybe I just need to work longer. Not sure. But in terms of how do I stay productive, it's a lot of caffeine probably.
Okay.
I don't
And then how do you want your team to stay productive? Like, how do you think about that?
So it depends on, what I found is it depends on who on the team. So when you make a VR app, you have your developers, you have your artists, and then you have your creative people. So before you make any VR experience, you have to storyboard it out, and that's like a lot more creative people. They're not necessarily good at making 3D models, but they kind of, they come up with crazy ideas and they sketch them out. So the artists and the modelers, the way we kind of make sure that people are productive is that we give them a lot of freedom to have essentially ownership over whatever they're designing. And what I find is that when they feel more connected to their work, they actually are able to kind of stay on schedule more, and essentially they're working harder. Developers are a little bit different. I found that they're very passionate about the technology. So oftentimes, it's like giving them just a challenge of building something. They're passionate about that, and they can keep keep working on that side. I'm not sure this is like the answers you're looking for.
No, I think so. I mean, I think that this stuff is really hard, right? And I like, at least what I've heard from you is that you're at least taking a nuanced approach and thinking that different people have slightly different styles. And if you're going to really get a lot out of the team, the things that you're hoping for, you're sort of adjusting to the way that, at least within your team, certain people are approaching in a different way. The stuff I heard, at least in the very beginning, was that you were going straight forward, right, in a singular direction, thinking that's what I needed to do, but then you had to pivot, right, which happens all the time. So the idea of, perhaps going ahead and firing half your staff and then building beds for the other staff to sleep in the office while you're not quite sure what the direction is that you're going in might not be a good idea for productivity. Is that right?
It's also not good for when we were in that situation, we had to kind of downsize the team too. Our team's remote. Like, I'm not expecting people to sleep in the office or anything like that. In fact, I want to make sure people don't burn out frequently. So usually it's not the best idea right now, but what we've seen is that, there'll be like periods of time where people are working a lot. And then I'm trying to make sure that they have at least 2 weeks of downtime. So whether that's like zero work, turn off Slack, turn off email, or just like give them minimal projects. And then another team essentially is, they're picking up some of the workload from there.
Yeah, that sounds great. Like in medicine, where I practice at the Brigham, there are many systems in our body, and our heart is always one of these classic ones where it has both a beat where it's squeezing and then a beat when it's relaxing. And one is called systole and the other one is called diastole. Both are essential that they have to happen, right? You're squeezing for about a third of the time and you're relaxing for about 2/3 of the time. The 2/3 of the time is where you let all the blood rush in to fill it up and then you squeeze it very quickly. Sometimes I've seen it. I haven't seen quite those ratios happen in the working world. I would say that this idea of sprinting all the time, there are many organizations that are saying sprint may not be the right word, but iterations are very important. Do you give yourself these diastole periods where you have a sense of recovering, or do you find that you're having to go all the time?
I try like not do anything Saturday, Sunday. Like I become a vegetable. Okay. I play with my cat, sit on the couch, watch TV. Like I try to just have at least 2 days, and it's sometimes like for this week, for example, the week before was just go, putting out pitch decks and stuff like that, and then we had flew the entire company out Monday and Tuesday. So yesterday, for example, I just sat on the couch and
let the ideas flow. Yeah. That sounds really great. So. This is the end of a big year. You've managed to succeed and survive, sort of some of the most important things a startup can do. You've got this new year coming ahead. As you think about it, are there ways that you imagine like achieving sort of an optimal experience, having the ability to both work really hard, accomplish things, but then also really enjoy the experience of this for yourself and for your team? We're not in control of everything, right? Not all the outcomes are there, but there's this imagined way of working in a hustle culture way, just killing yourself and that might achieve certain goals. There might be this way of being like so relaxed and maybe you're going to not get all the opportunities, or there's some middle path. Can you see a path for next year that you're thinking you might try for your team or for yourself?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things is giving our team, I want to give my team more autonomy. So there's a huge debate whether or not we should just eliminate remote work and force everyone to move into Massachusetts. Because right now, like we have people in West Virginia, Utah, we have a guy in Maryland, California, like they are spread throughout the country. And there was like a key point where I was like, should we just say, screw remote work, everyone has to come into the office, Elon Musk style, right? Like no more remote. Remote's no longer an option. I think we're not going to do that. So kind of, I think going forward in the future, keeping that part in, but also just giving people more freedom. There's a running joke in the company. So we have a project in our company it's a military project. It's training like Air Force special warfare people. But the running joke in the company is that every person we bring on the team, they somehow end up having a kid during the project. Right. We don't know why. So what I'm trying to say is from the span of June to now, 5 people on our team are now new fathers. Wow. So it's been hectic. They've been hectic. So it's a new thing for us because now something that I want them to have is I want them. My dad worked a lot. Like he wasn't really home that often. There was also a good period of time during high school where he was working in, I'm Chinese, but like Chinese American, but he was working in China and we just didn't see him for 4 years. He's just like gone. So I know I push my team hard, but I also want them to like not repeat the things that my dad did. Yeah. So
that sounds great. Are you a father yet?
Not that I know of.
Okay. I think that's a big deal. Like when you transition to that moment, then all of a sudden you've got this other project in your life, right? Which has needs and demands, and then having somebody who is aware and a boss who's aware of those new constraints is a big deal, right? I've certainly worked in companies where they've been unaware and then companies where they have been aware. So it's great that you're sort of thinking of it. We've seen a lot. I think this is a big deal and something I'm hoping that there'll be lots of thoughts in the audience about as well. Remote work versus no remote work. And lots of people come out with very strong opinions. Elon Musk, the lots of different sort of leaders. And then I've looked into the Harvard Business Review article that some of these people are quoting to say, oh, look, they say it doesn't work, right? But that article itself is based on sort of other business management leaders saying it doesn't work. So I haven't seen any hard data that shows that either way it does or doesn't work. And then there's some really great counterexample companies. I would say Basecamp being this really excellent example. And so they wrote a book called Remote Work. Their company has been completely remote from day one. Their original founder was in Chicago and the other one was in Sweden. And then they started. They are still fully remote, and they do these things called adventures, where they do their structured work for 6 weeks. They all get a different autonomy. Then they fly everyone into Chicago and they spend a week together. And they use that to celebrate the work that they've done. And then they use it to plan all the other work and get all of this like great interpersonal contact. And then they head back. Very different ways and styles of doing it. Have you based it on any of those things that to do remote work effectively, or just sort of found your own way?
You have to have periodic check-in. Or else, like we didn't have that, and that's when we started missing deadlines. The other thing too is you need to have a lot of trust. So like when you're hiring someone, if you're a remote company and you're hiring people, your hiring process needs to be a little bit more thorough along. So I'll give you an example. We hired a 3D modeler that the expectation is that the amount of workload we're giving them can only be done if they're working full-time hours. So we hired this person. We asked them like, hey, this is 40 hours a week. Like, just letting you know, that's the only way you're going to stay on time. And we found out, like, she started missing milestones and, like, key points, which delayed payment to us from the customer. And we found out afterwards that she had taken a part-time job right after she accepted our offer. So the issue, you need to have a lot of trust in people, essentially. And there's always going to be bad actors out there, or people that maybe are too confident in their time management abilities, to put it very lightly. So you have to make it very clear, and you have to trust that people will be transparent with you. So there's a lot of trust. The other thing too, I noticed with remote work is things get lost in translation a lot when you're like on Zoom. When I'm in person and we're talking to each other, right? Like it's going to be a lot easier for me to remember. Right. I don't know why, but I think there's an element of speaking to you in person that you don't get over Zoom. Right. So if you are doing anything remote and you're running a remote team, you have to make sure everything's written down clearly. Right. Like in Jira, if you're doing software development, or at the very least on a Google Doc, for example, right. Whereas people are going to start missing things.
Right. So one of the powerful techniques for life balance is by Cal Newport. Have you dived into any of Cal Newport's work? So he's a computer science professor down at Georgetown, and he has written a lot exploring sort of this new hyperactive hive mind that has emerged with all these new technologies that we've been developing. One of his most recent books was A World Without Email, but one of his sort of seminal books early on was Deep Work. He talks about this thing called a shutdown ritual, which has been an incredibly powerful technique that he uses at the end of his day to just convince his own mind that he has nothing left to do that evening that's not got a plan for tomorrow. And the thing that I've found, certainly trying it out myself, is that it gives you back your evenings, and it gives you back your weekends. It's one of the most amazing things I've ever tried. Do you have any ritual or routine like that helps you sort of shut down from work and have time to yourself?
I don't recommend this to most people. In fact, I don't recommend this at all. I just go to the bar.
All right. A specific one? Is there?
I've got a few.
I think it has some of the aspects of the shutdown ritual, which is that you're going to do a physical action, and then you're going to another space, which delineates it. Have you been working from home most of the time, or in the office?
I have to work in my office. That's the way I can't work at home. My cat would just like walk over the keyboard, and I'm like kicking me out of Zoom meetings and that kind of stuff. So.
Sounds good.
It's also really cute, so it just keeps distracting me. Like I'll pet her every like
There you go.
5 minutes.
Sounds like a great cat. So we'll be asking other people if they have rituals or routines that have helped them. I think there's lots to sort of explore there. We've talked about productivity. We talked a little bit about balance. One of the big things I think that many of the people who are demanding that people sleep at work and do other things is that time in the chair is not the same as effective work. And this sort of leads us to this idea of impact. A lot more risk and understanding is, what am I supposed to be doing? What's the most impactful thing? You as the team leader have the responsibility of not only helping your team to be doing effective work, but also sort of guiding the ship. In those settings, it doesn't always seem to make sense to me that people are following a very linear path, just working and gunning it all the time without the chance to sort of relax and think, how am I doing the things that have the biggest impact? How do you take time to think about, am I doing the right thing, or do I need to pivot or work on something else? You had that one experience where there was sort of an external requirement where you had to rethink it. But do you have a time of the month, time of the week where you say, this is where I do my big thinking?
No. And now that you mention it, it's probably not a bad idea. Yeah, I mean, right now we're always running, and there's just a lot of different projects and ideas we're pursuing. I'm kind of like a squirrel a little bit. Like I have the personality of a squirrel at times, or if I see like a tree or like a car, I'll just like focus on it. And I don't know if it's borderline ADHD, probably is, but no, I don't really do that. I mean, I did that this year at the end of the year, December, and that actually forced me to like. I had set a company offsite where we flew the entire team out, and it was like, all right, this is the day that I need to have like my ideas in order for next year. So that's helped a bit, but I don't do it that periodically. But that's not a bad idea.
Yeah. I'd been diving into this, trying to get a sense of like how our brains work in terms of being able to do this complicated work. I was really most interested in whether we are good multitaskers or not good multitaskers, as some people suggest. And are you a good multitasker? That's your question, actually, because there's an answer from neuroscience, and so I don't want to get you there. Nobody's a good multitasker. And in neuroscience, they don't even say multitasking. They just call it task switching. Right?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Yeah same. Okay. You're more aware.
Yeah. Task switch and forget the previous task.
Yeah,
kind of.
yeah. So totally right. I would have said, a year and a half ago, I would have said the same. Like, I'm okay at multitasking. Like, there's sometimes I'm better than others. But for complicated things, it turns out there are like 3 regions in the brain that are involved in this. And they are really good at solving a task at a time, right? And if you give yourself, they would take people into the lab, put them in a functional MRI, give them one problem, watch what happens, then give them 2 problems, or give them a problem and then a problem to solve immediately afterwards, and then watch. There were no new regions of the brain lighting up. So we've got this monoprocessor for complicated tasks. And then what they found was that when they were trying to solve two problems at the same time, both problems took longer, right? And they increased the error rate, and they required more energy to solve it, right? So this is this idea that by doing this kind of disruptive work, Cal Newport calls it shallow work, it's much more inefficient. Okay, how much inefficient? Like you're seeing all these people doing it all the time, and we sometimes are doing it ourselves. 20 to 40%. 20 to 40% longer with more errors. That's what the cost of shallow work is. And as we install Slack and set these expectations, they can be really damaging. There's one superpower that I learned about. I don't know if we hadn't had a chance to talk about it yet, but part of these, there are 2 sections in the parietal area and one in the prefrontal cortex. This one part in the prefrontal cortex is one of the most massively integrated parts of our brain. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but some people are like, the best ideas I've ever had, I've had in the shower or while I've been walking or exercising. And it's because this part of our brain is fully occupied with the task. It solves just for that task and it shuts down all the other stuff. When it's open, then it lets you integrate all of these issues that are just sort of in the periphery, but you're like, this is where my big idea is going to come from. But it needs space and time for that. Have you had any of those moments, like, or times where like you're working out or you're walking somewhere where like you have a realization that's really helped your business. I think it's a version of serendipity, but it looks like this brain wiring that helps it. But yes, I think that many people claim like they think it's that, but it's actually, that that feeling.
Yeah. So, yes, I do have an example. So our offshore wind software used to just be like inside a turbine. And I remember I was rock climbing once, and I am terrified of heights. And this was like one of those rock climbing gyms where you don't have a harness. So you go up, and if your arms are tired and you want to fall, you just let go and you just fall. And I remember climbing, and the only thing I could think of was, I don't want to fall. I don't want to fall. I don't want to fall. And then for some reason at the very top, that's when I realized I was like, you know what's missing in our software? Climbing. None of the users climbed the turbines, and then I fell. And that was the last time I thought about that for that day, the rest of the day. But that's.
Cool. Very cool. All right, so we're right at the very end. I just want any final words, and then we'll open up for questions. I think final words were really centered around, we're part of this entrepreneurial activity. We've talked about impact, balance, and productivity.
I think probably one of the biggest things I've learned is that I'm 25, I'm young. I don't have the pressures of a family or kids that I know of. And I think like it's something I've thought about, which is I've seen the people on my team, like I told you that project where everyone became a new dad.
The fertility project, is that right?
Yes. So like I've started to see like for like a change happen almost, where like before they became a new dad, they were almost like a different person. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. They were like a different person, and they became a new dad, and then now they're like, when I talk to them and everything or work with them, it's almost like it's a completely different person. Not in a good or bad way, they're just different. And it's something that made me think about a lot, which is like at some point, maybe not, I'll probably have I'll be a different position in life, where it's not just work, cat, bar,
there we go,
Tinder. There's gonna be a point in my life where it's gonna be different, and it made me think a lot about like what would that look like. I don't know. I also can't reconcile whether or not that will even work with the current job requirements or lifestyle I currently have. Maybe I'm thinking too much. I'm 25. I'm young.
Well, I hope it works. It would be lovely to see it continue and thrive. We're going to open it up now for questions. Does anybody have a question or a comment, something that's worked for them? Otherwise, we're going to pick on people.
Need any bar recommendations?
Oh, there we go.
Well, right now I've been working a little bit on VR projects a little bit too. And there was a question I wanted to ask about so you guys work remotely. I wanted to ask, did you guys do like meetings within VR? Have you guys tried it?
Don't.
Yeah.
No. That is the $15 million question that Facebook put that much in. They failed epically on that. No, because the problem right now of a lot of these VR avatars is that you communicate a lot with your facial expressions. And there's a person on my team, our creative director actually, who plays a massive role in a lot of key design decisions for our software. He's oddly enough a huge introvert, but I've worked with him for 3 years where I would say something like, "Hey, I have an idea." All I have to do is look at his eyebrows, and I can know immediately whether or not he liked it or not. You can't really do that with there's face tracking now, like the Oculus, but it's meh. Yeah.
Fascinating question. I think and a great answer. I certainly haven't had access to all the VR technology you have. There's some data that's I haven't looked up the original data myself yet, but like that 58% of the information that humans are conveyed to us is through body language. Then the other 30% is in voice tone, and then there's 7% from the words we say. I think that is fascinating, right? Because they're trying to introduce some aspects of that, but the bandwidth loss is significant still there. So as you're establishing trust, I could see how you might want to spend 2 weeks pairing with your new team members to bring them up to speed.
Yeah, there's also this other thing called the uncanny valley.
Totally.
So there's this concept where we evolved so that if we look at something that is like 95% close to a human face, we think it's like a predator that's like trying to trick us. So we naturally get disgusted or move away, or we become fearful of it. And it's like this curve where, if you're like 5 to 95% close to a human being, we accept it because we can tell that it's not like us. But then when you get into that weird uncanny valley, that's when our brain starts to reject it. So that's why, like, if you watch a Pixar movie, right, like they don't look anywhere near like you and I, like a real life face, but we are more willing to accept it because it doesn't hit the uncanny valley. Whereas if you look at some like demos from some of these game engines where they're like, we're going to push the boundaries to see how realistic it gets, some people are freaked out by them because it looks kind of like it's in the uncanny valley. That's one of the big issues also with VR. It's like if you want to make it simulate real life, like a real person, you want to make sure you don't hit the uncanny valley. Yeah. So all of our multiplayer stuff, for example, like all of our little avatars, they're like cute little robots and stuff. Like they're not actual people avatars.
Predator pretenders.
Yeah.
Great insight. Thanks. Great question.
So my question is, like, realistically, on average, how many hours a week would you say that you work? And, is it possible to not make sacrifices? And if not, what sacrifices do you feel like you've made in the process?
Some weeks it can be like 80. And but most weeks I would say, like if I just took an average, it's probably really only, nowadays it's only like 40, 50. So I'm moving towards balance more. The sacrifice, not hanging out with your friends probably is one big one. It gets lonely, right? And nowadays, like I mentioned, I try to like clear out my weekends.
Yeah.
And meaningfully reach out to people and try to hang out with people.
Yeah.
So that's a big one for me. Yeah.
It's a big insight. Thanks. There's a really great book Oliver Burkeman had written, Time Management for Mortals, and it has this title of 4,000 weeks, right? So 4,000 weeks, about the amount of time you get in an 80-year lifespan, if you're lucky, right? And the big thing I think from that book is that you have to take time to prioritize and reprioritize. And most people don't spend that effort, and so they end up wasting time. There's lots of studies that have showed people who stay later at work, like those last 4 to 6 to 8 hours, is almost always worthless, right? It doesn't generate value, but it causes a huge amount of emotional strain. If you've got any other outside relationships, it reduces it. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me why people like Elon Musk would create these environments, because I think there's really strong data that shows it doesn't work. Doesn't mean we don't sprint for certain things, but it's not sustainable.
Something also there was a time when I was probably working more than I should be. And in order to feel like I had friends, I started becoming friends with my employees. And that is one of the big lessons I learned, was you don't want to be in that position where you become like close friends with your employees, because if there's ever a time where you need to let go of them, it becomes a lot, like you don't think as rationally. Like there was a good period of time where I became really good friends with one of my employees, and they just were starting to miss the ball over and over again. And it's like I tried to talk to him, and he wasn't listening to feedback. So like he started to see me less as someone that is essentially their boss, right? And more as like, oh, he's a buddy of mine, right? So it's a fine line, but that's another thing I noticed. It's like you want to have friends, close relationships with people that aren't your employees, because there's going to be a time when you need your employees to listen to what you're saying and essentially like understand that, if they're not, their first their first relationship is as an employee, right? Professionally, right? Yeah.
Powerful lesson, I think, especially for early stage. Did that help to answer your question? Did you have a follow-up?
I'd like to ask about your recruitment strategy. Well, to manage your company, I think recruitment is very important. And when you recruit, do you screen people based on their skills and an education or sense of value? Because the sense of values is, the most important. The value. When you start, the company, and it could be the same the trait of an employee. So I'd like to ask this employee recruitment strategy.
Great.
So the question is, what's your recruitment strategy? Do you focus on credentials like education, skills, or do you also factor in things like passion for like the clean tech space and that kind of stuff? For engineering and modeling, a lot of it is just talent, not even like we hired people where Vinci is their actual first job, like first professional job. So we've turned down people that would have like 10 years of studio experience at like Activision or Blizzard because like when we hire, we don't really look at like, when we look at their resume, we focus more on like, what have you made? And if we've seen people from like our technical exams put out better things, like a kid put out a better thing that's more optimized and better written than someone that worked 10 years at Activision. So that's what we kind of look for first as talent. In terms of passion and focus, we advertise that we're working in green energy. For developers and modelers, frankly, I haven't really run into anyone where in their interview, they're like, I'm super passionate about wind turbines. I just want to model a wind turbine for your Eagle. Like I haven't run into that.
If you're out there, contact him.
If you are out there, you know who to hit up. But no, I haven't really run into that as much. I think a lot of people are more passionate about building the technology itself. For a lot of for interns especially though, like that's probably where we get a lot of people who are a lot more passionate about like, and it might just be like, I was in college a few years ago, right? Like when you're in senior year of college or throughout college, you're like, I want to make a change to the world. Life hasn't hit you in the face yet, but I'm just kidding. If you're a college student, it will. But it's like, I want to make a change in the world, and they're a lot more passionate about like, let's make the world more sustainable and green. And so that's where we've seen a lot of people be a lot more mission focused. And yeah.
Did that answer your question? I feel like you had a perspective.
Well, when you had the difficulty in payment, the salary to your employees, and did any of them know that you had the financial difficulties, and what was their reaction, and which you do not want, keep, continuing keeping them. You got my question?
When it was really tough, I'm trying to. So when you were coming to that real crisis point for the company, then it seemed like that people who were really passionate and committed to it might have been more there for you than others who would drift away much more quickly. Am I getting the gist of it correctly? So it would have been a real competitive advantage then to have hired people who are committed to perhaps the ideas or just to you and the organization.
Yeah. So when we were in that tough period, I had to go in with the knife essentially. I think a lot of people were like, if we go for, God forbid we ever go for that again, but we did. If I were a betting man, I would say that the people that stay are probably more passionate about working in our team and working in our technology, especially like the engineers, than necessarily, like working on wind turbines specifically. So it is passion, but passion in a different, like for something that's a little more on the technology side, on the team side. And yeah.
Great. The CEO of Netflix has this book, No Rules, goes to each of his managers and says, would you keep this employee if we had to pay them 5% more salary? And then if they say no, then he fires them.
The employee?
So he speaks to the manager and he
Yeah.
says, would you pay 5% more salary to keep this employee? And he does it for all the employees under that manager. And if they say no, then he fires the employee.
Oh, wow.
And you're like, because that's this concept of like, are they a valued member of your team is what he's getting to. It's a shocking kind of feeling and question, but a different way of getting to that, not the nicest way.
I'm sorry, I was a little bit late in coming, so you may have answered this question, but do you identify your company as a learning and development company? And if so, what gave you the idea of going into this clean tech industry, and creating a whole library of trainings, right, and certification? Because I'm a technical trainer myself, and so I'm curious to know how you went into this line of business. Like, did you get a contract from the company? Did that lead you to actually develop these trainings, or did you just have a passion for that field that you just went along and created a whole library of trainings?
Yeah, I mean, so there was I started Vinci, and there was probably a 2-year period where we didn't even think about green energy. It never crossed my mind, at least. We're like purely focused on doing a lot of defense work. But I will say during college, as I mentioned, when you're in college, you're like, I'm going to change the world. Right. Well, at the time, I was very much focused on like clean energy. Like that was one of the big passions of mine. Yeah. I think if I didn't start Vinci, I would probably be working. Funny enough, like I would probably be applying to work at Tesla or Solar City or something like that. So offshore wind was something I kind of stumbled upon. Clean energy. So there was an event in New Bedford that Siemens Energy, which is one of the biggest manufacturers of turbines, they're running an event. And I was like, yeah, might as well just see what's going on here. I met their head of training, and I was just like, I'm doing VR stuff. That's we're currently doing for airplanes. And she's like, that could actually be pretty useful for us. So one of the big issues with a lot of training for this is that it's all hands-on. So unless you actually have like a wind turbine, it's very hard to actually certify someone. And the problem is these things are expensive. They're like $5 million a pop. So you either are flying to like Orlando, which is their main facility, or flying to Europe, or you're flying around the world to essentially go to these little simulator sites to get training. So the idea is, can we just reverse the flow and instead just mail people headsets and then do training that way, like at home, essentially. So that was kind of the idea. But actually most of our like work and contracts is way earlier in the pipeline, even before you start certifying people. So we have a lot of general education modules for like middle school, high schoolers, associate's degrees, where students are learning about what they want to do in their life. And it's way more impactful, we found, to have people actually be in that environment, than just showing them in PowerPoint, essentially.
Great, Jennifer, thanks. I think we're going to have to wrap. Tom, do you have a question? Okay, I'll let you have the last one, and then we're going to let...
I've seen Eagle grow with his team. So my question, I mean, it's both of you, is like time management for your team, especially whether it's experienced or like more younger people, like how do you ensure that there are like tips, tricks, anything that you found successful to help your younger team make sure they're managing their time effectively? Because that's a huge learning lesson. I have younger employees as well, and it's just, how can you guide them, whether it's an operations manual or task management system, any small things that you found to help make sure your team is effective with their time?
Yeah. So oddly enough, I am the youngest person in my company, weirdly enough. the older the people are. So one thing that is good with, I guess, a lot of professional experience is that a lot of people develop that at other jobs, so we don't have to retrain them. So a lot of, as you look at Vinci, like I'm here, I probably have the worst time management skill. And then you have, as you go further down the line, people are better at managing their time. Now that comes with a few caveats. One, like if they're talking about age, on the older side, if I say I need this thing done by this day, it will be done. However, if it's like, hey, we have a fire right now and I need this thing done by tomorrow, is that possible? Could you do it, please? Yeah. They're usually going to be like, no. Okay. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry, I don't know what to say. It's just not going to happen. Whereas on the younger side, if something breaks and it's on fire, I'm like, I need this thing fixed by tomorrow. Is that possible? They're actually like, yeah, sure thing. I'll be up tonight. Just let me know. I'll message you at like 3 a.m. Hey, boss, it's fixed. So that's definitely one thing. But to answer Tom's question specifically for our younger team members, so we use a lot of like task tracking things like Jira. It's a software for software development. It's not like we're not monitoring what they're doing on their computers or anything like that. But we lay out the exact milestones of like when things should be done. And the other thing too is we actually go to them and we're like, hey, these are the list of tasks. How long do you think it would take for you to do them? So now they themselves are holding themselves accountable because it's their own estimates. Yeah. So it's not perfect. Those are generally the ways it works. But obviously, like I've noticed at times, like when if we hire an intern from college, I become the second youngest at Vinci. But I've noticed sometimes some interns are like on TikTok and stuff, and it's just like, come on. Yeah. You're focused. Yeah, be focused. You're on a company call right now. Yeah.
It sounds like Tom, at least channeling some of the literature that's out there, this idea of deep work, the ability to help them. Sometimes there's a lot of training, this monkey mind that's been around for these many thousands of years that we've developed all these meditative techniques for. Sometimes the new technologies, especially this attention/distraction economy that's out there, the TikToks, they're coming in, they're feeling that they need to be checking all the time, helping to retrain that. Sounds like you've got some strategies for that. And then the idea of like, we talked a little bit about it before, which is the power of no. And then sometimes it sounds like you're developing some skills about the empowering no. But there's ways to say no in a horrible way. We've all worked with people like that, and you just don't work more with those people. But then there's some people who say no in the best possible way, and your respect for them grows. Sounds like you've got some people like that.
Something that one of my good friends who's a entrepreneur, he started this company called BioBots, which is just 3D printer that like 3D prints organs. And something he said to me that was really powerful was your job as the entrepreneur is to say no to the right things. Yeah. Because you could be pulled in all different kinds of directions. And it is a true thing. Like, frankly, we've got probably way too many different things going on at Vinci. And I'm like talking to investors, they're going to be like, some of them have said no to us because they're like, you've got too much going on. You need to be focused on one thing. And that's true. Yeah.
Big one, I would say, like a book that I saw change a company that I was working with from being family completely unfriendly, messages all night, expecting rapid responses on the weekends, and then changing over was a book by Clay Christensen, which is just How Will You Measure Your Life? I recommend giving it to every CEO you know, and then you see them change, right? This idea that the time away matters, you have creative thoughts, and it matters for your team and you as well. A wonderful last point. I'm going to hand it over to Sophia, and you had some next steps.
Yeah, of course. Just want to thank everyone again for coming, taking the time out of your day. Thank you to Narath and Helly and, of course, Eagle and Tom back there. I had all of our emails and websites up on the board. I'll try to get them back up before everyone leaves. But Eagle, I'm sure people can reach out, contact you if they're interested.
Yes, Vinci-VR.com, and then it'll be you're going to post it.
Yeah, I'll put it back up there. There is a little sign-in sheet with a clipboard at the front if people wouldn't mind just jotting down their names and emails. And we do have This is a series, so we have a couple other events coming up that the dates will be announced.
January and February and March.
Yes, January, February, March. So, yeah. But thank you. And yeah, I'll put those up there and enjoy the rest of your night.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.